This video will explore the secrets of Mount Vernon Estate in Virginia. Next month, in October 2024, Washington, D.C. will see a portrait linked to American history come up for auction. This is St. John the Evangelist, recorded in George Washington's 1799 Mount Vernon inventory, and it reflects the secrets of Mount Vernon, including Freemasonry. Auction house The Potomac Company, located on the Potomac River, issued the following statement. Quote, "We are honored to offer for auction in October an important and rare piece of artwork from Washington's Mount Vernon," announced Elizabeth Haney Weinstein, owner of the Potomac Company. A pastel portrait of St. John the Evangelist is one of the few pieces of religious art Washington displayed at his home. He was a strong advocate for religious freedom, but was not very outspoken about his own religious beliefs, which adds to its significance. This piece is remarkable in several ways. It is one of a fairly limited number of extant items that can be authenticated as furnishings from Mount Vernon, and it is one that Washington displayed prominently in a central and very visible part of the house known as the New Room. As explained, the New Room was a formal space used for receiving visitors, showcasing art, and sometimes for dining, according to the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. George Washington called the largest and grandest addition to his home his New Room. With its two-story high ceiling, detailed architecture, and stylish furnishings, the new room intended to convey unpretentious beauty, fine craftsmanship, and qualities that Washington believed communicated the new nation's values, including furniture from both Philadelphia and Virginia. The general summed up his ambitious goals for the room in a letter written while he was away fighting in the Revolutionary War. "I would have the whole executed in a masterly manner," he wrote. With its bright green paint, a show of wealth due to the crushing of beetle wings to achieve the hue, the new room is currently not on display to tourists. It served as a showroom or statement room in the tradition of grand saloons in 18th century British country houses, and Washington's family was British. Architectural historians agreed that the new room's generous dimensions and harmonious proportions of a 4 to 3 to 2 length to width to height ratio derive from the tradition of double cube rooms, so named because of their impressive volume. By the mid-19th century, such rooms evolved in British country houses to grand spaces known as saloons, frequently located adjacent to an equally grand hall. The uses of a saloon are deeply embedded in 18th century social structures and hosting practices, making them elusive to modern audiences who prefer a TV room. Unlike a library or bedchamber, the 18th century saloon is defined less by practicality than by formality, notably great volume and height exceeding that of surrounding rooms, and a strict adherence to symmetry to lend it to its use as an art gallery. Combined, the characteristics make such spaces seem out of the ordinary and special. The 18th century English saloons were highly architectural in treatment, a magnificent setting for great gatherings rather than for everyday life, and essentially masculine in feeling, as opposed to the quiet, feminine attributes of the withdrawing room. The German word Prunksaal, or showroom, perhaps describes it best. Typically, the saloon included large-scale works of art with a set of seating furniture arranged with tables around the walls. In the tradition of British country houses, George Washington's new room at Mount Vernon served as a destination for his visitors. Accounts from the 1790s suggest an established routine, if not a route, for strangers who arrived with appropriate letters of introduction. As the English visitor Joshua Brooks recalled of his February 1799 visit, "We arrived on horseback about 12. After a short time, Washington's secretary, Mr. Lear, came and invited us in. He then invited us to visit the drawing room. He then accompanied us into a front small parlor, after which the party returned to the sitting room. Like many English saloons, Mount Vernon's new room was permanently fitted out as the Washington's picture gallery. North light streaming in from the magnificent Venetian window provided ideal illumination for viewing the general's pictures, including St. John the Evangelist. According to Washington's probate inventory gathered after his death, a total of 21 works of art hung in this room at the time of his death, most in impressive gilt frames. Currently, the room houses only 4 or 5 paintings. In Washington's time, there were 8 oil paintings, 2 pastel drawings, both of them religious, 7 large prints, and 4 small prints. Each of the latter prints hung under one of Washington's newfangled argand wall lamps. The symmetrical arrangement of the pictures and the sculptural quality of the wooden furniture in the room emphasized its gallery function. Also, like saloons in grander English houses, Mount Vernon's new room could be pressed into service as a dining room when large numbers of guests needed to be entertained. In 1798, the Washingtons hosted dinner guests on 203 of the 310 recorded days, or about 2/3 of the time. Only 7 of these dinners included more than 10 guests, and so they would have likely fit comfortably in the dining room. Most of these dinners occurred in the summer months of June and July, when the high ceiling and 2 exterior doors of the new room allowed for much-needed cross-ventilation in the Virginia summer. In 1799, there were 18 large dinner parties, most in conjunction with the February 1799 nuptials of Martha Washington's granddaughter, Nellie Parke Custis, and George Washington's nephew, Lawrence Lewis, coming over from their nearby estate of Woodlawn. Sometimes the presence of government officials, diplomats, or other high-ranking visitors called for the greater formality of the new room. In November 1797, the Washingtons entertained a party that included the British envoy, Sir Robert Liston, his wife, Lady Henrietta Marchant Liston, and Mr. James Athill, the Speaker of the Assembly of the island of Antigua. Shortly after this meeting, Antigua developed its own Freemasonry branch. For these larger or more formal dinners, the Washingtons' enslaved house servants would have moved the dining tables from the dining room and set them up in the new room. The Washingtons were not unused to this level of activity, since they themselves served as nannies to the very wealthy Spencer family of England. The Washingtons continued to follow the practice, prevalent in both English and Virginia houses, of dining on small, relatively portable tables that could be moved and folded up and arranged against a wall when not in use. The alternate custom of having a large table permanently set up in the center of a dining room was still relatively novel in late 18th century England, and would not become prevalent in American homes until well after the Washingtons' deaths, around the second decade of the 19th century. Notably, George Washington's 1800 probate inventory does not list any dining tables in the new room. The only 2 dining tables listed in the mansion were in the dining room. The new room was Washington's statement room. It was an elegant multi-purpose space, permanently installed as an art gallery and occasionally set up for dining. Its soaring height, its bright green pigment, and its extensive, delicate neoclassical ornament full of American art made the space one of the most memorable rooms in the new American nation, even had it not been the setting for meeting the illustrious Washington, the man of the hour, the father of his country. When Washington returned from the Continental Army on Christmas Eve, 1783, he found his north wing of Mount Vernon an empty shell. During this period, he corresponded extensively with a new acquaintance, Samuel Vaughan, about the latest developments in English domestic architecture. Vaughan had recently immigrated from London and was well versed in English fashions, including delicate neoclassical plasterwork and vivid paint schemes. Work completed in the new room between 1784 and 1787 included putting up lath, plastering the walls, creating and installing plaster ornament, installing a doweled wood floor, cornices, moldings, painting, and installing door hardware and firebacks. Is it possible that Vaughan also informed Washington the latest fashion was to include religious portraits, or was this Washington's own special taste? By the end of 1787, the room was finished and awaiting furnishings. Washington returned from the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in September of that year. He had about a year and a half to enjoy his new room prior to departing again to accept the presidency of the new nation in April 1789. Unfortunately, we have little information on how the room was furnished during this initial period of use. An admiring description written by Philadelphia Mayor Samuel Powell in October 1787 lavished high praise on the room as follows. At the east end of the house is a magnificent room 16 feet high, perhaps 37 by 28 feet, with a window to the north and south, a Venetian window to the east. The chimney piece is of Italian marble with columns of Sienna marble and very handsome bas-relief tablets of white marble relative to rural affairs. The room is the whole height of the house. The ceiling is covered and richly ornamented in a light pleasing taste. Was Powell also reacting to the painting of St. John? The elegant marble mantelpiece, a gift from Englishman Vaughan, occupied pride of place in the center of the long wall. It was topped by 3 pieces of Worcester garniture, also sent by Vaughan. When the Washingtons returned to Mount Vernon in the spring of 1797, the new room was fitted out almost completely with new furnishings, making it new again more than 2 decades after construction began. Of the items listed in the room in Washington's probate inventory, all but a handful had been acquired during or after his presidency. 2 matching sideboards and a set of 24 side chairs, for example, were purchased from Philadelphia cabinetmaker and retailer John Aitken, just as Washington's second term ended. The history of the North Wing's construction, decoration, and furnishing highlights why Washington called it the New Room. Not only was it the last room added to Mount Vernon, it was the most stylish. Throughout the last quarter century of Washington's life, it was continually new. It was newly framed in the 1770s, newly fitted out in the 1780s with decorative plasterwork, woodwork, paint, and flooring, and newly furnished in the 1790s. It's possible the St. John the Evangelist painting survived every single update. The term New Room was not simply a chronological descriptor. It signaled its most important function, to act as the mansion's showplace, a testimony to the owner's gentility, position, and good taste. According to a Mount Vernon curator, George Washington displayed very little sacred art in his home. In fact, there are just 2 pieces in the entire house that could be classified as religious: the pastel portrait of St. John and a portrait of the Virgin Mary, which were listed in inventory records upon Washington's death as 1 likeness St. John and 1 likeness Virgin Mary. Washington's affinity for this particular religious painting may be due to the fact that St. John the Evangelist is the patron saint of Freemasonry. Washington was a proud and active member of Masonic lodges in Fredericksburg and Alexandria, Virginia, from age 20 until his death. At his first inauguration in 1789, he swore his oath with his hand resting on the Bible from St. John's Lodge in New York City. St. John's Lodge seems to be a Grand Lodge and is the oldest Freemason lodge in New York. Its Grand Lodge has a gilded statue of George Washington inside. Washington's youth was tied up with Freemasonry. In 1753, he became a Master Mason, the highest basic rank. His ceremony was held at the Masonic Lodge No. 4 in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He was 21 years old and would soon command his first military operation as a major in the Virginia Colonial Militia. Of course, he would later rebel against England's choice not to advance him, and so the power of vengeance is incredibly important to the history of America. Freemasons trace the origins of Masonry back to King Solomon's temple built in biblical times and are now expected to believe in the Supreme Being, an seeming alternative to God, follow specific religious rites, and maintain a vow of secrecy. The Masons of the 18th century adhered to liberal democratic principles, including religious tolerance, loyalty to local government, and the importance of charity. From its inception, Freemasonry encountered considerable opposition from organized religion, especially the Catholic Church. For George Washington, joining the Masons was a rite of passage, an expression of his civic responsibility, and simply fun. Lodges were large, comfortable, and contained instruments hard to find like organs, and we know Washington loved to dance and liked music. Washington attended church up and down the colonies and was a Christian. In his final inaugural speech, he warned Americans against the dangers of foreign interference. Back in the 1770s, American Masonry was a hotbed of revolution against the British, and hadn't fallen into the weird degeneracy that marks today's Masons, which Undercover Kyle revealed on X or Twitter. After becoming a Master Mason, Washington had the option of passing through a series of additional rites that would take him to higher so-called degrees. In 1788, shortly after becoming the first President of the United States, Washington was elected the first worshipful Master of Alexandria Lodge No. 22. For a natural leader, such election was natural. Many other leaders of the American Revolution, including Paul Revere, John Hancock, the Marquis de Lafayette, and the Boston Tea Party saboteurs, were also Freemasons. Masonic rites were witnessed at such events as Washington's presidential inauguration and the laying of the cornerstone of the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C., a city supposedly designed with Masonic symbols in mind, with triangles linking the Capitol building, Washington Monument, and Mount Vernon Square. Masonic symbols approved by Washington in the design of the Great Seal of the United States can be seen on the $1 bill. The all-seeing eye above an unfinished pyramid is Masonic, and the scroll beneath, which proclaims the advent of a new secular order in Latin, is one of Freemasonry's long-standing goals, in contrast to our life under God, advanced by devout Christians. The Great Seal appeared on the dollar bill during the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also a Mason, who was integral in the disintegration of the gold standard of the U.S. dollar and the welcoming of globalism by the U.S. Freemasonry has continued to be important in U.S. politics. At least 15 presidents, 5 Supreme Court Chief Justices, and numerous members of Congress have been Masons. Presidents known to be Masons include Washington, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, James Polk, James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield, William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Warren Harding, FDR, Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson, and Gerald Ford. You can learn more about the Truman administration and Joseph McCarthy on this channel. Today, there are an estimated 2 million Masons in the United States. The St. John the Evangelist painting also has a documented history from Washington's lifetime to today, a history intertwined with that of the companion Virgin Mary portrait. Both portraits hung in Washington's new room and have matching original 18th century gilded Rococo frames. They were listed together in inventories upon the deaths of George and Martha Washington. They were both referenced in auction records from the 19th century when Mount Vernon fell into disrepair and was attacked during the Civil War, and both paintings were purchased and passed down through the families of Washington descendants who you can learn about on this channel. The Virgin Mary portrait was ultimately acquired from a Washington descendant by Mount Vernon, where it currently hangs in the new room. The St. John portrait is owned by another Washington descendant and was on loan until 2014 to Mount Vernon, where it also hung in the new room alongside the Virgin Mary portrait. The piece is now being offered at auction along with other historically significant items that descended in the Washington family. Some of these items are George Washington's watermarked writing paper, with Liberty in the center and the name George Washington in a circular design surrounding it, surmounted by a griffin. There are 2 possible paper mills in Pennsylvania that may have manufactured paper for Washington. A pair of late 18th century Chinese export urns from descendants of George Mason and his son, John Mason, whose family home, Gunston Hall, is just a few miles from Mount Vernon. a yellow gold bracelet with a clasp engraved with George Washington's coat of arms, which is now the coat of arms of Washington, D.C., topped by a griffin, and Mount Vernon, accompanied by an 1861 letter from silversmith Samuel Kirk and Sons of Baltimore to John Augustine A. Washington III, great-grand-nephew of George Washington, the last private owner of Mount Vernon, and who has his own video on this channel. The bracelet has 14-karat yellow gold beads and coffee bean seed pod beads. Washington grew coffee at Mount Vernon. The Washington coat of arms can be spotted in part on the Washington tombs outside Althorpe Manor House of England, as the Washingtons were neighbors of the Spencer family, which produced Lady Diana Spencer, known as Princess Diana. These historical objects have remained in our family for nearly 250 years, and we think now it is time to share them. Our late mother, Louisa Fontaine Washington Dawson Smucker, who bequeathed them to us, descends as we do from the John Augustine Washington line, which inherited Mount Vernon from his full brother George. The pastel of St. John has been of great meaning to our family, and is a unique, if not mysterious, artifact from our nation's founding father, said Philip Smucker, author of Writing with George, Sportsmanship and Chivalry in the Making of America's First President. Who do you think should buy this piece?